From less than pleasant beginnings, the United States and United Kingdom have developed a deep and profound relationship. There is significant cultural overlap. British and American celebrities are often just as famous across the pond as at home. The Prime Minister is traditionally one of the first calls the President makes after assuming office. There's deep military integration and cooperation, and both countries are part of the Five Eyes intelligence sharing agreement along with fellow Anglophone countries of Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. What is often lost in discussions of the US-UK alliance is the remarkable overlap in strategic interests. The quote-unquote special relationship between the two countries, while built of shared history, culture, institutions, and language, has strong realist foundations. The United States is blessed with the most beneficial geography on the planet. With a continent to itself, it possesses a wealth of natural resources, arable land, and population centers. But most importantly, it has the great moats of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The United States is, in military terms, an island. Canada has a tenth the population, while Mexico's population centers are separated by the deserts of northern Mexico and the Rio Grande River. During the Mexican-American War, the United States won decisively by simply waiting for the Mexican army to march north into the desert and using its navy to capture the port city of Veracruz and march the short distance to Mexico City. This maneuver cost Mexico a third of its territory and permanently ended any threat to the United States in the Western Hemisphere. Since the 1848 war, the U.S. has been secure from foreign threats. With the approving of the U.S. Navy during the Spanish-American War in 1898, the U.S. could definitively enforce the Monroe Doctrine, cordoning off the Western Hemisphere as an American lake. The only thing that could break this is if another nation could float a navy of sufficient scale to challenge the U.S. fleet. The U.S. is fundamentally a maritime power. Secure in its borders, it can turn its immense resources into building a navy that can project power globally, protecting American interests. Since the end of World War II, the U.S. has maintained the most powerful navy by a large margin, currently fielding 11 supercarriers, each of which wield more firepower than all but the largest navies, along with 10 more smaller carriers and a host of other vessels. The most formidable navy in the world is the United States Navy. The second most is the U.S. Marine Corps. Even the U.S. Coast Guard is a blue water capable force. In order to challenge the United States in its backyard, a rival would need to have sufficient spare military capacity that is at least equivalent to the entire U.S. force. To do that, they must consolidate enough territories to sufficiently dominate Eurasia in the same way the U.S. dominates the Western Hemisphere. This is more difficult in the Eastern Hemisphere than in the Americas. There are numerous regions that possess enough demographic and geographic strength to vie for that position. In the Western Hemisphere, only Argentina has a geography remotely in the same caliber as the United States, but a habit of political self-destruction has condemned it to a position below its less blessed neighbors. Compare that to the Northern European plain, which alone has produced Napoleonic France, Wilhelmine Germany, Nazi Germany, Tsarist Russia, and the Soviet Union, all of which have tried to consolidate Eurasia. Going east, Turkey, Iran, India, China, and Japan are all independent poles that have tried to both consolidate power and resisted rival consolidations. But if any one power were to succeed, then they could bring the entire might of Eurasia against the United States, effectively being able to conquer the world. So U.S. strategic policy rests on working to prevent any such power from rising up. It interferes in old world affairs to check rising countries, to act as a balancer over the horizon, because if Eurasian powers are preoccupied, then they have no spare capacity to threaten the United States. In both world wars, the United States was forced out of its isolationism to stop a rising Germany, and post-1945, it was forced to stay engaged by the prospects of Soviet domination. The United Kingdom has the exact same strategic interests, just on a smaller scale. As an island off the coast of Europe, the United Kingdom enjoys strategic distance from continental affairs. Since the subjugation of Scotland, it hasn't needed to invest in land power, instead relying on its navy to mediate the sharp end of its interactions with the wider world. Much like the US, it is only threatened if another European power can float a navy that can break the Royal Navy. The last time this was attempted was in 1588, when bad weather and excellent command saved the English from the Spanish Armada. The UK has gone to great lengths never to be put in that position again, implementing an explicit strategy of maintaining a navy equal to the combined fleets of the next two largest navies. This led to investing heavily to maintain superiority during the Anglo-German naval arms race prior to World War I, and going so far as to attack the Allied French fleet at Mers el-Kabir to prevent it from falling into Nazi hands after the fall of France. Whenever a mainland power attempts to consolidate the European continent, the United Kingdom is forced to intervene and tip the balance of power against the consolidator. They fought centuries of wars against France as they attempted to build a comparable navy, culminating in the Napoleonic Wars, which finally broke French designs on Europe. The British played the Great Game against Tsarist Russia. They also intervened against German expansion twice, and were key allies against the Soviet Union during the Cold War. By supporting the United Kingdom, the United States effectively outsources the balancing of Europe. The British will, for their own security, prevent any power from consolidating Europe. If no power can conquer Europe, then a significant avenue of Eurasian consolidation is blocked. The UK's relatively small perch on the edge of Europe gives it outward-facing interests, but prevents it from threatening the United States. The British Empire was only possible due to an overwhelming technological advantage. For 2 centuries, the British literally brought guns to knife fights. Once that technological edge evaporated, the empire was on borrowed time. 2 world wars and the Great Depression sapped the capacity to maintain global reach, and so the British retreated east of Suez, and eventually from there. The United Kingdom has interests aligned with the United States but does not threaten it, so a special relationship can develop without any risk of future confrontation. The United States has other close alliances, and many alliances of convenience, but few come close to the depth of affinity and cooperation that exists with the British. Even with all that has been said, it is telling that the other close allies are the fellow Anglophones of Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. Culture, history, and language all play important roles in developing international ties. A shared language and understanding makes relationships between leaders and bureaucrats easier. There are fewer misunderstandings and more affinities. Japan performs a similar role in East Asia that the UK does in Europe. An archipelago with a strong navy, it does more to contain Chinese expansion than any other country in the region. The US and Japan are close allies and cooperate on a whole host of issues, but do not have the same level of integration as with their cultural family. Whatever the future may hold, one thing to count on is the endurance of the alliance between the United States and United Kingdom. An island balancing a continent will always be useful to a continent balancing a hemisphere.